All right, we'll get going. Um, so I see a lot of familiar names that have been popping up as I've been admitting everyone to the Zoom call, and also some new ones. So I'm glad to see that and welcome. For those of you who maybe don't know me, I'm Angela. I'm the dog behavior specialist at HSHV, and I think our other behavior staff person who works with dogs is also on, Teresa. So Teresa, feel free to pop in at any point if you want to, or if you have any comments about anything. And our behavior team, Anne and Kristen, are also joining us. So I'm glad they were able to attend. So you've got a lot of resources here. Feel free to ask questions. This is your opportunity to, you've got all four of us present. So we're happy to have this be a discussion and answer any questions that you guys might have. My goal today was to just have a nice kind of opportunity to talk to a lot of foster families and just give a little bit of what I'm calling dog behavior 101. One of the things that we've sort of discovered through this pandemic is one of the nice things about Zoom is it enables us to do trainings in a format that it's easier for more people to attend. And we can record them so they're always available for later for people who aren't present or people who foster later on. We can start to assemble a little resource library for people to have. So I always like having a live audience when I do these though, because it's really less interesting if it's just me talking to my laptop. So like I said, please feel free to comment, ask questions. I know we have some experienced fosters as well as potentially some newer ones. So it'd be great if you want to weigh in with your experiences, suggestions, comments, etc. We're also hoping that this can become part of sort of a series. I'd like to, if this works and people find it helpful, I'll be talking about some various behavior issues that are common among foster dogs briefly here, but some of these more common ones, we would like to do some topic specific ones in the future if people are interested. So we'll talk about that a little later to delve deeper into things like reactivity or resource guarding or separation anxiety. But the goal tonight is I'm going to kind of talk generally about what types of dogs usually go to foster, give a little bit of sort of just 101 about very high level approach of how we deal with training, behavior change, and working with behavior issues. I'll talk a little more specifically about some of the common behaviors that our foster homes might be dealing with the dogs, and some, again, fairly high level tips of how to manage and train around some of those things. Those will also, as I said, be things that we can give more in-depth support to you guys individually or in future Zoom calls, but hopefully give you a little bit of initial support. And then we'll talk some more about what other kind of support is available if you are fostering a dog with a behavior concern through HSHV. Before I get going, does anyone have any initial questions, or Anne, Kristen, Teresa, do any of you want to say anything before I get going? All right, I'm seeing shaking heads. Great. So first and foremost, how do we pick what dogs go to foster? There might be a lot of reasons, but most often they fall into one of these three categories or potentially multiple categories. But we might put in foster requests for kind of long staying animals who have been at the shelter for a while for whatever reason and just need a break from that environment. It's hard to be kenneled for long periods of time. So if an animal stay is kind of going on longer than we'd like, it's great to get them into a home rather than continuing to sit in a kennel. They may be dogs that need further behavior evaluation or treatment, behavior modification help from someone who can do it more intensively or in a home environment than we can do in a shelter. Might be dogs that need more medical evaluation or treatment. Some important things to know is that the dogs that go to foster may or may not be available for adoption, but we will let you know that before you take them, what their status is. And the other thing is, realize that probably most dogs that go to foster do have some degree of behavior challenges and may need some help from you guys. So, I kind of have these categories of long stayers and dogs needing behavior help, but often our long stayers, not always, but sometimes the long stayers because they need a little bit more help behaviorally. So it is pretty common that the dogs that go to foster aren't necessarily going to be those kind of quote unquote easy easy dogs that are going to be a piece of cake. There's a good chance we're going to need some help from you to help these guys be the best they can be. So as I said, our long stayers are dogs that have just been in the shelter for longer than average time. They need a break. These dogs might be available, or they might be in behavior treatment, or they might be case dogs or safe harbor dogs now that we're required to house either during court proceedings or while an owner is trying to resolve a housing or medical crisis, and we're just temporarily housing dogs. So some of these dogs are not technically legally the property of the shelter, but it's nice when some of these cases or safe harbors go on for an extended amount of time if they don't have to spend the entire time sitting in a kennel at the shelter. There are some special considerations to think about if you have a case or a safe harbor dog due to some of those kind of privacy and confidentiality issues. But with any of the dogs, do you realize they might have some adoption restrictions, if they're available or going to be available, or just based on the behavior that we have seen or been treating in the shelter. So we may have suggestions that we think these dogs should be with no kids, no cats, no dogs, etc. And please keep this in mind when you're managing who's interacting with your dog. If you're fostering a dog that's no dogs, probably best to not start introducing them to your neighbor's dogs or your neighbor's kids if they're no kids. And going back to the case and safe harbor dogs, remember that there are some confidentiality privacy issues around those situations. So don't disclose any information or share pictures of those dogs. Don't be posting on Facebook. Be aware that sometimes case dogs do end up going back to the original situation if the court decides that. So that can be something to prepare yourselves for as a potentiality. If you're fostering one of these dogs, I know that can be kind of tough on people sometimes, but there are just those considerations when you do have case dogs. Anne or Kristen, anything you'd mention about those situations? All right.
No, I think you covered it pretty well.
Okay. So when we had put dogs or do a foster request for dogs that are in what we call like a behavior stage. So we have different kind of stages in the dog stay, behavior evaluation, behavior treatment, based on maybe things that we've observed or have been reported by someone surrendering that we feel like we need to do some work with before they're ready for adoption. We may just need more information on how the dog behaves in a home environment. Some dogs in the shelter will be just so extremely stressed or afraid that we can't get really a full picture of who they are and what their behaviors might be. They might be so shut down or so avoidant. So, or maybe we're seeing things that simply weren't reported by the owner that surrendered them to the shelter. And so we want to get a little bit more information. Is this just a response to the stress of the shelter environment or are there larger issues? We might need some help working on a training or behavior modification plan that is challenging or sometimes impossible to do in a shelter environment. A good example of that might be if a dog has been reported for having separation anxiety, or we've identified that, needing help with helping desensitize dogs to those absences. That's something that's just not possible to do in a kennel, and often dogs that do suffer from separation anxiety really do struggle in that kennel environment where they're more socially isolated than they'd be in a home. If you're fostering a dog that is in a behavior stage, we in the behavior team will want to be in close contact with you. We'll want your feedback, your observations. That's going to be great information for us in developing a behavior plan. And we'll, need your input and your help on working on whatever that plan may be. And sometimes the plan is just try to reduce stress and let this dog decompress for a little bit and let's see who they are. And sometimes we learn that, boy, in a home environment, the behaviors aren't nearly as concerning as they were in a shelter. Other times we might need to proactively be working on something before we can feel comfortable placing that dog in a home. So we'll work with you, giving you some tips and advice about how to train and work with those dogs. It is critical that you stay in contact with us, give us regular feedback, be honest, even if it's challenging behavior, even if you're concerned about it. The more upfront and clear you are about what's going on, and the sooner you report those things, the better, so that we can help intervene, get dogs what they need before a problem's been existing for a very long time. The longer something goes on, the harder it's going to be to turn around. And one thing to be aware of is that in cases where behavior issues are just going to be too unsafe and too difficult to modify to a place where we feel the animal can be safe, humane euthanasia may sometimes be the outcome. You know, HSHV is a no-kill shelter by the Asilomar Accord, which means that we don't euthanize for space. We only euthanize for untreatable medical or behavior conditions. And, you know, part of the point of this presentation and where you guys come in is we're trying to do everything we can to help dogs be behaviorally able to be placed in the community. Sometimes that's just not possible. And, you know, we have to consider the safety of other humans and dogs and other animals in the community before we place a dog. So that can be an outcome. If we are concerned that that's a potential outcome for a dog, we will be upfront and honest with you before you take that dog into your home, so you can decide whether you want to kind of go down that potential path. But do consider this possibility when making the decision to foster dogs that are in behavior stage, as we can't necessarily make promises that they will be going up for adoption. Any questions about that? Something in the chat.
As part of the treatment, are you going to mention if they're on medication for?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. We'll talk about anxiety meds.
Gotcha.
All right. So I want to talk just a little bit generally about kind of the basics of learning theory and how all animals learn. And I'm going to talk about some just general tips for probably any dog that goes into foster, and then we'll delve into some of the more specific common behavior issues. So when we work with training, things we're always keeping in mind is that any animal, 24 hours a day, you know, every second they're alive, they are figuring out what behaviors work and don't work. So they're learning by consequences. They're figuring out what behaviors result in things they like, and they're figuring out what behaviors result in things they don't like. If something results in something the animal likes, that behavior is more likely to continue. If the consequence is something they don't like, that behavior is less likely to continue. The other thing that's going on all the time is the animal is figuring out what things in the environment are safe and what's unsafe. So they're learning by association. And it's important to realize, like, both of these types of learning are going on all of the time. They're constantly forming associations. They're constantly learning from consequences. We have long categorized these types of learning as basically kind of operant conditioning, learning by consequence, and kind of classical conditioning by association. The more and more we learn about the brain and how learning happens, these processes are so linked that they're being considered less and less separate as people continue to study the brain. But the important thing is, because we're learning by they're learning by consequence and association at all times, our methods really matter. Which is why we're going to talk about at HSHV, we use positive reinforcement training, and we don't use training that is relying on using punishments or aversives, things that are unpleasant to the animal and are really thinking about trying to stop and suppress behavior. Because they're learning by association, while punishment and aversives might change a behavior, it's also going to affect how they feel about things. And we don't want to teach an animal that people or other dogs or cars or new places are unsafe. Safe, confident animals are going to be the best kind to be placed as pets. And we want to really preserve their confidence and feeling that the world is a good place to be. And just we'll note that what we need to worry about as owners, fosters, trainers, is really controlling consequences, forming the associations we want. Don't worry about any of the leader of the pack type mentality. It really has long been disproven, kind of an older school approach to training. The more we learn about the brain and how animals learn, realize it doesn't really have anything necessarily to do with how we train dogs. It's very, in fact, not supported by how dogs actually interact and learn anyway. Dogs aren't actually pack animals. They know we're not dogs. They're not worried about if we're the alpha. They know we know where the treats are stored and the food bowl and bins are, and that's really all we need is the good news to change behavior. Sorry, did someone join? So I'm adding them. So the terms you'll hear us kind of throw about a lot are reinforcement versus punishment. So reinforcement is building behavior. As I said, consequence is something that the animal likes, so the behavior will strengthen, continue, be more frequent. If a dog sits and gets a treat, they're going to be more likely to do sitting behavior in the future. And the good thing is that reinforcement behaviors that have been reinforced become rewarding on their own because of that learning by association. So example is if we teach a dog to go lay on their dog bed or a mat, and we give them treats when they lay there, or that's where we give them their Kong at night, they'll begin to seek out that mat to relax on and settle on, even on their own, even when we're not training and rewarding. I often kind of talk to owners about if you had a certain chair in your house that sometimes when you sat on it, somebody gave you $10. Over time, that'd probably be your favorite chair, and you'd probably choose to sit in it because hey, sometimes it pays off. But you know, you've got pretty good associations with that chair too, so you're going to build a habit of hanging out in that chair more often, even when the $10 isn't being delivered every single time. On the kind of other side of the coin, punishment is a consequence that will stop a behavior. The important thing to realize is that punishment usually only temporarily stops or suppresses behavior. The behavior might stop for a long time, but when the punishment is no longer present, usually it will reappear, and usually it will then require additional punishment. And as we'll talk about in a minute, usually the punishment will have to get harsher and harsher and harsher, which is why things like shock collars have dials on them, so that you can keep turning up the intensity, because animals get used to aversives at a certain level over time and they stop being effective. So some of the advantages of the positive reinforcement-based methods. We create eager learners who, as I said, enjoy the behaviors that they're being taught. Again, because of classical conditioning, they're forming those positive associations. Because that it's going to build a relationship between the teacher and learner, the trainer and the dog. Like I said, we know where the snacks are kept, so we become pretty valuable and important and liked by them. If we do make a mistake with positive reinforcement training, no harm really comes of it. Maybe a little bit of confusion temporarily with that one repetition that we rewarded kind of at the wrong time, maybe a couple extra calories for those oops cookies, but we're unlikely to do any really behavioral damage. Positive reinforcement can create strong behaviors. It can change things that are even very serious behaviors like aggression. And simply from a training perspective and a learning perspective, it's easier to focus on the things we do want rather than all the things we don't. Often when I talk to owners, I kind of will say, if you made a list of all the things you don't want your dog to do, or your cat or your parrot, whatever, you can make an endless list of all the things you don't want them barking at or chewing on or peeing on or digging up. And it would be really exhausting to come up with a training plan where we were just trying to run around and reactively try to stop all those things we don't want. Instead, if we just think of things we do like our pets to do, you know, sitting on a mat, sitting for greeting, walking with a loose leash, coming when called, we could have maybe a half dozen behaviors in our training plan. We train, 5, 6 solid behaviors. It's a lot easier than the endless list of kind of things to react to. And it's easier for the learner. If we just stop a behavior, it doesn't help the learner meet whatever need they were trying to meet. So they're probably going to go try something else. It might not be something we like any better. So better to kind of, I always think of it being the GPS and kind of guiding our pets, our animals that we share our lives with, to kind of know what things we like and helping make sure they pay off for them so they like doing them as well. And going back to that classical conditioning aspect, when we're delivering reinforcement, we're delivering things that the animal likes, we're creating positive associations. If having a training session is resulting in cookies and things they like, if going on a walk, seeing other dogs, seeing new people is associated with stuff they enjoy, they're going to have good associations, be less likely to be fearful, be less likely to show avoidance behaviors, reactive behaviors, aggressive behaviors, etc. And really, when it comes down to it, that's kind of our biggest goal. Is if we want an animal that's going to be safe in people's homes, the highest likelihood to have that is a dog that's kind of free of fear, free of anxiety, and free of stress. So going a little bit more into the problems with punishment. So as I said, if we make a mistake in positive reinforcement training, it's not really a big deal. They got a couple extra cookies. However, if we make a mistake in the timing or application of our punishment when we're training, we can do a lot of damage. And the thing is that punishment requires really great observation skills, impeccable timing that most of us just don't have. Most of us spend a long time, if we're into training animals, perfecting our observation and timing skills. So it's very easy, especially if you're very new to this, to accidentally correct your dog for the wrong thing. And I see this all the time. There was a YouTube video actually put out by a trainer who probably would have wanted to rethink using this as an ad, but he was using some corrective techniques to try to modify a dog reacting in a car, but his timing was so poor that he was actually essentially punishing the dog for being quiet in the car and reinforcing when the dog started to react. And so the reaction was continuing, and it was a very odd choice, I would think, to use that as your advertisement. But I always think it was a great example of, boy, when your timing's off, you really can confuse the dog and not get the result you want. I talked earlier about habituation, which is this phenomenon that learners will become used to a certain level of punishment. And so what would stop behavior previously might not have the same effect over time. So if we're relying on punishment, we most likely are going to have to start resorting to harsher and harsher things, which, none of us, I'm sure, want to do. That's not why we own pets, foster pets, etc. No one wants to be doing unpleasant things to their pet. But that is why, like I said, there are dials on those collars. I often say that punishment is sort of like dropping a bomb. It's really imprecise and unpredictable. So if we go back to thinking about classical conditioning, we punish a dog for some behavior out on a walk, pulling on a leash, they can associate that correction and that kind of unpleasant feeling that it creates with anything that was in the environment at the time. So that could include you. We can do damage to our relationship, cause fear, avoidance, or aggression in our interactions with that individual dog, or we could create a bad association with the other dog that was across the street or the child that was riding his bike down the sidewalk when that happened. And common fallout from punishment is increased fear, aggression, anxiety, which again lead to much worse problems down the road than simply pulling on leash. Something to kind of keep in mind is that things don't have to be painful in order to be aversive. If you had, well, maybe we'll have to say, I always said our coworker when I gave this example, but let's say, a house member who came over, and every time they walked over, they started tapping you on the shoulder over and over and over again as they talked. You know, that's probably not painful. That's probably not doing damage, but it's probably going to get annoying, and you're probably going to start to have an emotional response when that same person walks over the next time and the next time and the next time. You're probably going to want to avoid them. You're probably going to start getting irritated with them. You might start snapping at them. So just because we might think we're using a mild form of correction doesn't mean that it won't have some kind of fallout. By definition, anything that stops a behavior does have emotional fallout. And so some of those consequences could be also avoidance, and a dog that sort of shuts down and tries to prevent punishment from happening by stopping all behavior, which will slow learning. It's hard to train an animal that has learned that doing anything is potentially unsafe. And as I said, we're not solving the underlying problem. So think about trying to push a beach ball underwater. We're just kind of suppressing it. If we're not meeting needs, not telling dogs the appropriate way that they can get their needs met in a way that also works out for us, sooner or later that beach ball is going to be popping up somewhere, and odds are it's not going to be popping up in a way that you like or what you wanted or intended. And I talked a little bit about this already, but you know, by definition, if something stops a behavior, it's a punisher. They work because they're aversive, and it will result in fallout. We just don't know how severe the fallout will be. Some dogs are really pretty forgiving. Maybe we get a little bit of avoidance, a little bit of hesitation. And so we get lulled into thinking like it's fine and it's okay, but that's not always going to be the case with our individual dogs or individual learners. And we really can't predict how severe the fallout will be. It may not be related to the severity of the aversive that we're applying. So even things like warning beeps and vibrations, even though we wouldn't categorize that as painful, if it's stopping the behavior, it's because it's getting some kind of avoidance response. The other thing about those warning beeps and vibrations is the reason they work usually is because they are conditioned punishers. Most often they have already been associated with a worse aversive that follows, so they still have the same behavioral and emotional response. So when people kind of say, oh, it's, you know, all they have to do is feel the vibration. Well, it's still having the same effect as perhaps a more severe correction, because the reason it's working is because they're trying to avoid something worse happening. And when I like to just present this because when we talk about positive reinforcement at the Humane Society, it sounds just very kind of nice, you know, happy, lovey, rainbows and unicorns. But we do this because this is the science, and this is the reality. And it's not just because we want to be nice to our animals, which of course we do. It's also because it's what works. It's what science shows us works. Science shows us is safest. And really, when it comes right down to me, to my decisions I make in training, I want to think about what is effective, you know, what's ethical and what is safe. This is one of my favorite quotes by Murray Sidman, who did a lot of work about studying the effects of coercion and emotional fallout. And this great quote is, positive reinforcement works and everything else is dangerous. And it's dangerous because of the effects of that classical conditioning. If we teach an animal that we're unsafe, the environment is unsafe, the world is unsafe, other people, other dogs, other animals are potentially unsafe because they've been associated with some unpleasantness, that fallout can result in things we really don't want: fear, avoidance, reactivity, aggression. None of that is desirable. So I'm thinking I don't want to do any actual harm with my training methods. We only want to do good things and help our animals be more adaptable, not less. So I've thrown a lot at you guys. I know some of you, this is repeat, you've heard me kind of get on the soapbox before, but I think it's always good to review as we kind of move forward and talking about how we address certain behavior problems and why we take that approach. Does anyone have any questions about sort of the science of the learning theory? Not hear anything, nothing's coming up on chat, so. moving on. So how do we modify behavior? This is my kind of mantra that I repeat over and over. We think about reinforcing the behaviors that we do want. So reinforcement with dogs, most commonly, things like treats and toys. Sometimes we're tempted to say like, maybe some petting or praise should be enough. What's reinforcing is really up to that individual learner. Just because we intend praise and pets to be a reinforcer doesn't necessarily mean that it will for that individual or in that particular context or for that particular behavior. So don't be afraid to be generous, give the treats, give the toys, give the things that they really like. The learning will happen faster, I guarantee you, if we use higher level reinforcers. And then prevent the rehearsal of behaviors that we don't want. So management, I'll be talking quite a bit about management as we move forward. And that basically means arranging environments so that stuff we don't want is just really, really unlikely to happen in the first place. Because once a problem behavior starts, we don't have lots of great options. Every time an animal rehearses a behavior, it becomes more of a habit that's potentially going to occur in the future. So I think about building good habits. I want the rehearsal of the stuff we want. I don't want the practice of the stuff we don't want. So kind of on the theme of management, just some general kind of rules, tips for any dog in foster, whether they're a behavior case, a medical case, just a long stayer who needs a break. Containment. So when you're fostering, your dogs need to be physically contained at all times, meaning they need to be on leash or behind a secure physical fence. So no off leash walks at the ARB, no being let out into the back 40 that's unfenced, and no training to an invisible fence if you have an invisible fence for your other dog on the property. We need physical containment systems in place for the foster dogs, and supervise when they're outside. Even if it is a fenced area, dogs can be surprisingly good escape artists. Any of you who have been to the shelter or maybe walk dogs there, you've seen the fences that go around our play yard. They're pretty tall fences, and probably a few times a year somebody scales them. That's why we tend to also leave leashes or long lines on, and at least until we know a dog is not going to be an escape artist, and get out. They can jump high, they can be remarkably agile and creative, so they can find the one weak point in the fence and suddenly make themselves very small and seemingly boneless to squeeze through it. So supervise them while they're outside. If a dog does get loose on you, and things happen, so please let us know immediately if a dog is missing so we can help out. Don't be afraid. We recognize that when we're caring for animals, stuff happens, leashes get dropped, dogs magically find the small point in the fence, but we want to know as soon as possible. Anything you'd say about that, Anne or Kristen?
I would just add to what you said about jumping over a fence. If you have a fenced-in yard and your dog never jumped the fence, that doesn't mean the foster's not going to try to. And we've actually had a couple this year that did exactly that, and ended up back at the shelter because somebody found them and knew to bring them to us, while the foster was desperately trying to find them and we were getting ready to go help look. But yeah, don't trust them. Keep an eye on them. You also tell them to leave the leash on them when they first come home. Yep. For like 24 or 48 hours, just so you can grab them if you need to.
Yep. I think I talked about that somewhere. Don't I talk? Yeah. All right. So as far as, and again, Anne or Kristen, jump in if I say any of this wrong, but as far as when you're fostering a dog, with the interactions with other people and animals, this will probably vary based on the individual animal. So just follow the recommendations, restrictions, and advice from the foster and behavior teams. Again, if the dog has been labeled as no kids, no cats, no dogs, probably shouldn't be interacting with those groups in your home also. Dogs that aren't available for adoption should not be, socializing and doing tons of meet and greets. We have behavior concerns. We don't want to set dogs up for situations maybe that they're not ready for. If we have, case dogs where there's some privacy concerns, we probably don't want to be showing them all over the neighborhood, telling everyone the story, etc. And no dog parks, daycares, things like that for foster dogs, regardless of if they're available or if they're, even if they're dog social, just too high risk in an uncontrolled environment. Anything I got wrong or you'd add to that, Anne?
Nope, that's right. With the dog park one, it's the issue of other dogs getting our dogs into trouble more than anything else. I mean, we know a foster might keep it on a leash, but you can't trust the other people to keep their dogs leashed up. And we've had a couple incidents where one in particular where we wasted an entire day thinking one of our dogs had gotten in a fight at a dog park, and it turned out to be a dog from another rescue. But wasted everybody's time, and just don't take them to dog parks.
With any dog that you bring into your home, I would recommend that plan on, especially for the first few days, really just trying to keep things quiet and reduce stressors. We often talk about this sort of 3-day decompression time. After a big kind of acutely stressful event, dogs on average tend to need about 3 days for all those stress hormones to kind of go through their system, to kind of recover, adjust, and really kind of show a little bit more of themselves. So during that time, just keep it quiet. A lot of times they just need to catch up on sleep, because sleep deprivation for dogs in a shelter is a very real thing. So often dogs will go to foster and kind of pass out and just snooze for a couple days, and that's fine. Just keep it quiet. No need to be doing big outings, going, I don't know what anyone does anymore, but going downtown, going to the pet store, things like that. Just let it be quiet. Don't invite a bunch of people over to see your new foster dog. Let them settle and adjust and get used to your family and your household, etc. We ask that really for grooming, ideally we would only like to do medically necessary grooming. Grooming requires a lot of invasive handling, potentially scary things. It can be a fairly common scenario where aggression might happen. So especially if we have a dog that's in some kind of behavior treatment phase, we're working on body handling, working on confidence, that can be a potentially traumatic event for a dog, potentially dangerous event for an owner if they're not okay with toenail trims or baths. So try not to subject them to baths, nail trims, things like that. If it feels like it's medically necessary, let us know and we'll have you kind of bring them back and have the veterinarians or the shelter vet team do those things if we feel like it's necessary. Don't take them to a groomer and have anything done, even if you're willing to pay for it. We just don't. Lots of unpredictable stuff can happen at a groomer. We don't want them biting the groomer. We don't want them getting into it with another dog that's loose at the grooming shop, just like at a daycare. Don't want them getting loose when someone opens the door to the grooming salon and at just the wrong time. Too unpredictable, having them out of our control. So I know it would be fabulous if all the dogs came home from the shelter just shiny and beautiful and trimmed and manicured, but please try to keep it to medically necessary stuff. And again, especially in probably not an issue right these days, but no large gatherings as you first bring your foster dog home. That can be really kind of overwhelming and scary, especially if we have a dog that's working on some kind of behavior issue. And just a few other general good practices. Anne mentioned this. Good idea to just let your dog drag a leash for the first few days in your home. You know, obviously supervised so it doesn't get caught and create a safety hazard, but nice way to just manage, prevent them from getting into something that you realize suddenly isn't quite dog proof, or you see them start to head towards that fence and start to scale it just like a cat. If you have that line dragging, you can more easily manage and keep them safe, especially in those early days as you're learning about them and they're learning about your environment. It's nice if you can plan. Usually, it's helpful to plan for some kind of confinement area where your dog can be that's kind of free of stuff that's valuable or dangerous, that you don't want chewed up or them getting into. We can provide crates, but if the dog isn't crate trained, you might think, is there a mud room or a hallway, you know, a spare bedroom with not a whole lot in it, that you can maybe confine the dog with an X pen or a baby gate or something like that. Often, sometimes we have those that we can lend out as well. But those can all be good options if a dog doesn't tolerate the close confinement of a crate, but you still want to restrict their access to, you know, the room with the nice furniture or the valuable stuff. In general, think about rewarding the behaviors you like with high value treats. If you don't know what your particular foster dog likes, ask, or you haven't found the right treat that they enjoy, pop us an email. We probably know. We probably know what their favorite is, so we might be able to give you advice. Don't use physical force to move a dog. Lure them with treats. Again, another reason maybe to have them drag a leash, because if you do need to just simply prevent a situation that's going to be unsafe or really problematic, don't want you like grabbing the collar or grabbing the dog or trying to pick them up. Ideally, lure them away and have them cooperatively move, following the treats or just moving along with the leash. If they get something they shouldn't have in their mouth, trade for treats. Don't try to wrestle it out of their mouth. We'll talk about resource guarding in a bit. And let dogs choose when and whether they interact, with you, with other family members, etc. So don't corner them, don't force petting or cuddles on them. But if they approach, if they solicit touch and contact and snuggling, great. I always like to, especially with a dog that you're getting to know, or if the dog's getting to know a new person, think about using the 3-second rule of petting, which basically means pet for no more than 3 seconds, pause. Do they nudge your hand, paw at you, kind of lean in some more, kind of saying, keep going, I like that? Or do they shake off and walk away? If they shake off and walk away, they're saying they're done with that. And that's fine. You know, all of us have our times when we're interested in attention and affection and times that we don't. So don't take it personally and don't be offended. But it's good that they tell you that they're done in that way of just walking away and avoiding, versus having to tell you in more extreme measures because they feel like they're like they can't get away. And when you're introducing your dogs as they, you know, they come available and you're helping them show them off to people in the neighborhood, always good to kind of guide others to use that as well. Any questions on just sort of general learning, theory, training, general tips for management before I get into more significant kind of behavior issues? All right. So while this is not going to be an exhaustive list of every behavioral problem you might see, I tried to think of some of the more common ones that we get questions about at the behavior office, and maybe are behaviors that we might prompt us to request a foster for this dog. And every one of these topics, I would like to do a full Zoom presentation on, and plan to for you guys to go into much more detail, because all of these could easily be an hour and a half discussion on their own. So I'm not going to be able to delve super deep into any one of them. other than kind of give you some very kind of broad level advice for management and maybe some simple tips and just thinking about the strategy and sort of the approach that you want to take. So to start with kind of fear and avoidance. And by this, I mean, you know, the dog, the less confident dog, the dog that is retreating, not soliciting attention, kind of curled up, hiding in their crate, doesn't want to go outside, slow to approach you or other family members, but not necessarily usually becoming reactive, which is another response to fear quite often, but the kind that more choose escape avoidance type behavior. So for these things, these dogs, thinking about management, big things we can do are create a low stress environment. So we talked about giving them that decompression time, really kind of reduce their exposure to triggers and scary stuff, go really slow. Slow is going to get you where you want to be faster in the long run than trying to push and pressure. There's just really no way you can force a fearful dog to not be fearful. What you have to do is kind of let it go at their own time. So be patient and give the dog as much choice and predictability as you can. So when we talk about choice, ways we can give our fearful dogs choice are where they want to hide, what their safe space is, where they're going to curl up. If they feel like they want to hang out curled in their crate in a quiet room, that's what they might need for a while. So that's fine. You can leave the door open, give them good things in there, go and kind of sit outside the crate and spend time in that room. When they feel brave enough to come out, fantastic. But don't try to force it. Don't try to take that safe spot away. Let them have that choice. Again, let them choose whether they approach, whether they interact, whether they accept attention, whether they, how far they venture out into the yard or out on walks. If they need to turn around and go back, that's fine. Let them kind of know that they have the control to say when they've had enough and when they need to go back or go back to whatever feels safe for them. And predictability, kind of having all family members be similar in how they interact, how they approach, trying to build some kind of routine into the household as much as possible. Dogs that can be really stressed and afraid can struggle in households where it's various routines, various people coming in and out, lots of traffic. So as much as you can, try to establish a good routine, some predictability, who's handling, who's feeding, how that's all looking. That's going to help them feel more confident. And then when we do training to kind of help overcome that fear, we think about this phrase, desensitization and counter conditioning. If I email you or send you something and I forget to not use shorthand and I abbreviate DSCC, this is what I mean. Desensitizing means that we are gradually exposing an animal to the thing that normally triggers fear, but we're only doing it at a level that's not quite fear provoking at that point. So thinking about what do we alter, what do we control to minimize that fear response. Distance is absolutely your friend with these guys. So distance from the trigger, maybe the duration that they're exposed to the trigger, the intensity of the trigger. If we have a dog that's very scared of new people, and especially men, maybe we're going to start first having that dog get to know some women first and build confidence there before we start introducing more men. So not trying to flood them and overwhelm them by just exposing them to things at intensity that's getting them scared, but more at a level where they notice they're not quite feeling the fear until they get comfortable at that level. And then we can increase, get a little closer, increase the intensity, increase the duration of time they're exposed, etc. Very often when we do desensitization, we also like to do it along with counter conditioning, which means we pair the trigger with something the dog likes. So scary new person kind of appears out in the distance, and now the dog gets a piece of cheese. Scary person goes away, cheese stops. Scary person appears in the distance, cheese happens. So that eventually the appearance of that trigger starts to get that positive emotional kind of anticipatory reaction rather than a fear and avoidance reaction. The important thing to realize is that desensitization counter conditioning is a very subtle, gradual process that starts out at very low level. And really, this should not be an exciting process. If we're doing it right, it looks real boring. Animals are calm the whole time. They're not reacting. They're not fearful. And it just goes slowly. You know, it doesn't necessarily make exciting TV. It should be very, very boring when you're doing DSCC. That's how you know you're doing it right. So keep in mind, more is not necessarily better. If your animal already has a fear response to something, just saying, well, I need to get them out in the world. I need to expose them to more. I need to have more people come over. While it's well-intentioned, it's unlikely to do good. It's more likely to sensitize your dog even more and get them more scared. If we already have a fear response, it's too late for socialization. It's time that we need to kind of go back, scale it all back to a much lower intensity exposure, and then build up from there. Does that make sense to people? The difference? I see Moni nodding. Any questions? I'm just pulling my chat back up real quick. Okay. Reactivity. This is another very common one. Very common in the shelter, like pretty common in the dogs we send to foster. And, you know, one thing to realize is that most reactivity is also fear, stress, anxiety, and a desire to kind of get further away from the trigger that's provoking that stress response. So it's kind of a false dichotomy to kind of have fear on one slide and reactivity on this slide. But what I'm thinking about more is, how is the animal coping with the fear to get that distance? Are they escaping and avoiding like the dogs I just talked about, or are they making more noise and saying, get away from me? So I just say that because sometimes people kind of put a lot of labels on a dog that responds with reactivity. They label them as mean or bad or aggressive. These dogs are stressed and scared and anxious too. They're just finding a different behavior to help them get their needs met of getting the trigger to go away. And so a lot of what we do is also this DSCC, trying to change their associations. But with a dog that reacts, the thing about reactivity is it kind of gets the job done for the dog. They learn if they lunge and bark, the scary thing goes away. So it tends to reinforce that behavior and make it more likely to happen in the future. So when we are working on changing that response, it's very important to do management to reduce how often the dog is becoming reactive. So probably job one, if you bring a foster home that's having some reactivity problems, is reduce their exposure to the triggers as much as possible. If they react to sounds from outside your apartment or your house, the car door is slamming, the voices going, people walking by, then play some white noise, a fan, an air purifier, some soft music, run the TV, the radio, to kind of have some baseline level of sound that's going to muffle those exterior noises, make it less likely they're going to respond or react to the sounds. If there are windows that the dog is barking out of, you can kind of restrict their access to those windows somehow. Maybe you shut them out of that room during the day. Maybe you rearrange furniture so they don't have what I often call the reactivity perch, where they can stare out the window and yell at everybody who goes by. You can just tape something up over the lower parts of the windows that the dogs can see through to kind of block that visual stimuli. A lot of dogs, if they don't have to watch it, the reactivity goes down quite a lot. Because it can be a hard thing to manage or to change the behavior of reacting at things if your dog is spending 8 hours a day sitting in the picture window in the front of your house, barking every time anything comes into view. They're getting a whole lot of practice at that. For dogs that are reactive on leash, try to walk at less busy times of day. And I look for areas that have less dog traffic, where you have a clear line of sight. You're not going to be like turning a corner and being surprised by something. and that you have options, that you can change direction, that you can move away, even if it's just getting some lateral space, whether it's crossing a street, stepping off a trail into a field. Tight trails are hard for leash reactive dogs. Areas where there are lots of blind corners where you can be surprised are hard because you might not see something coming. We want to be able to have fair enough warning that if we see something off in the distance, we have a plan and we can start to change direction. And like I said, distance is your friend. So trying to reduce the likelihood that your dog is going to have a reaction on leash. Often walking on a front attached harness is going to be the best option for these dogs. Collars, when dogs start to react, what I find is they start to pull in that collar, and then that increases tension because now their breathing is being restricted and they're getting more tense, and the behavior just escalates. If we can get pressure off of the neck, often that alone will start to reduce the intensity of the reaction. It gives you also more power steering in a gentle way that's not going to cause pain. We can steer the dog, move away, across the street, even if the dog's kind of focused on the trigger. And if you're having, if you're worried about losing control when they have a reactive outburst, or that they might get so worked up that they squirm out of the harness, I recommend using 2 points of contact, meaning you can have a leash that goes to the martingale collar and one that goes to the harness. You can have like a leash coupler so that, you know, one end goes to the harness, one goes to the collar, or they make anymore. You can find European style leads or double-ended leads that have 2 straps with clips, so one end can go to each. Those are really good kind of safety tools and management tools that can be a little more control of the dog. And as far as training, ultimately what we're wanting to do is reward a response that is other than barking and lunging. So if they notice the trigger off in the distance and they don't bark, definitely reward that. Increase distance, keep them, what we say, below threshold. And often a really easy way to do both those things at the same time is to teach your dog a find it game. And by that, I just mean teach the dog that when you say the words find it, you're about to drop a treat or 2 kind of a foot in front of their nose so they can get their nose down, track for it, eat it, and keep moving. We're doing a few things when we do that. We're rewarding a different behavior. Sniffing and tracking on the ground is incompatible with staring and barking and lunging at a trigger. It enables us to manage the situation and keep moving and increase distance so our dog's less likely to react. And we're going back to that counter conditioning. Dog is on the other side of the street. Hot dogs are showing up on the sidewalk in front of you. Dogs can start to show a positive emotional response, and sometimes they'll be, you know, scanning for hot dogs. And when I hear them say, you know, well, now my dog sees another dog and they're looking on the ground for treats, it's like, well, that's, you know, the idea. That's a lot better than lunging and barking and growling and carrying on. So find it game won't necessarily fix all of your activity problems, but that's the first little trick I give anyone as a starting point to help out of some tense situations that maybe are getting difficult right now. And if the dog goes over threshold, just move. That's why we like front attached harnesses, because we have a little more control of the dog without using something that's actually going to be painful. But we just kind of want to get out of dodge and block their vision, get further away, and get them to go back under threshold, because the longer they stay in that state of lunging and barking, the more they're rehearsing it, the more likely it's going to occur in the future. Any questions? I know reactivity is a hot topic that a lot of people probably deal with and struggle with. Separation anxiety. So separation anxiety it's a tough one. The good news about separation anxiety is, of all of these behaviors, problems that I'm talking about, this is one that is proven to be quite modifiable in most situations. There are some known protocols that research shows are highly effective at helping dogs overcome separation anxiety. The bad news is it's a difficult thing. It requires some major adjustments to people's lives sometimes. So from a management perspective, if we have a dog that is panicking and freaking out when they're left alone, to change that behavior, it really requires some period upfront of being able to totally suspend absences and not leave the dog alone for longer than they can handle until they get to the point that they are comfortable being alone. You know, this was kind of a harder thing to ask owners to do pre-COVID, but in the last year, you know, it's sort of a funny thing in that one of the worries we have with COVID is that with people around so much, a lot of these dogs that were adopted during this past year are going to be accustomed to having the whole family around all the time. And when things open up and people start to go back to more regular schedules, we do worry that we're going to see more separation anxiety because dogs, you know, have not been accustomed to that happening. The good news, though, is that this is the perfect time to work on modifying separation anxiety because so many more people are home so much more of the time. They're working from home more frequently. They're teaching their kids at home. So the good news for separation anxiety dogs is we kind of, a lot of us have the ability to help them. But that can be a tricky thing because not all of us are working from home. So if you're working with a dog that does have separation anxiety, if we know this and we're placing the dog in foster, we're probably going to have this conversation with you before they go to foster to see, is this something you're able to do, you or your family members, kind of have a period of time that you can prevent having to leave this dog alone. If you do have to leave, you can try to arrange for someone to be with the dog. This is a little thing, something that's been harder, I guess, during COVID, is that there have been times in the past we've had a dog in foster with separation anxiety. And if the foster did have to go grocery shopping or go into a doctor's appointment, sometimes we were able to like find dog walking volunteers who were happy to come sit in your living room with the dog and for 2 hours and help you out. Or I think sometimes we had them dropped off at the front desk to hang out if the dog wasn't too stressed about being at the shelter. You know, now I know that if I don't want multiple people and strangers coming into our homes and vice versa, probably harder to find volunteers to go dog sit for a couple hours. So but talk to us. We can maybe help brainstorm some options if that's a scenario with a dog you're fostering. You have to go to a doctor's appointment. What are we going to do with this dog for a couple hours? But one thing to note that if this is going to not be possible with your schedule, this might be a case where we would want to refoster a dog. Again, if we know that the dog suffers from separation anxiety, it was reported by the person who surrendered them, we're probably going to specifically look for somebody who feels like they can suspend absences for a while. But if you bring a dog home to foster and discover like, wow, they have severe separation anxiety, you're still going into work, leaving the home, and that's unavoidable, we might need to find another option for the dog. And simply crate training may not be the answer. Dogs with separation anxiety usually don't tolerate being crated because sometimes, you know, we think, well, if the problem is that when the dog's left alone, they're becoming really destructive. If we just crated it, it would manage that behavior. You know, maybe not. Most dogs, if it's truly separation anxiety that's motivating the destructive behavior, that dog's probably going to still panic in a crate, and there's just too high of a risk that they could injure themselves. That said, not all destructive behavior is separation anxiety. It can be boredom. It can be all kinds of things. So one of the things we might ask you to do and help you brainstorm ways to do if you're fostering a dog that we suspect or we're worried might have some separation anxiety is see if we can get some video and assess what's going on. Sometimes we can be really sure that it's separation anxiety, and when we look at a video, we just see a perfectly relaxed, happy dog simply entertaining themselves in very inappropriate ways. And so for that dog, maybe crate training is going to be a solution. But for true separation anxiety, it may not be. So while we're suspending absences, the training part of it would be gradually desensitizing the dog to first departure cues and then very brief absences, and then building up again only as long as the dog is comfortable. So these protocols can start out really in very baby steps, quite often, of just you putting your shoes on and taking them off and sitting back down, or picking up the keys, putting them down, sitting back down, or walking to the door and back. And what we're looking for is only kind of extending that once the dog is really no longer interested that you're picking up your keys or you're putting your shoes on, or that you're touching the door, and building up from there. So it's not that the dog can never be left alone again. It's just that if you get your dog desensitized and comfortable with a 20-minute absence, can't leave for an hour, it will push your whole training back. We need to really work up and not put that dog in over their heads until they're ready to be left alone that long. Any questions about separation anxiety? What am I doing? Okay. All right. This is one of my favorite topics, resource and location guarding. A fairly common issue again for dogs that we get in the shelter. It's a pretty common reason that dogs are surrendered. So if the dog becomes possessive over their food bowl, their stuff, their location, etc., this is, again, one thing that it's very important to use management and really prevent the dog from being in a situation where they're going to reverse that behavior, because once they start guarding something, you don't really have a good option. So from a management perspective, if it's feasible, like for some things, we can just prevent this from happening by not giving them the thing that they guard. If the dog only guards rawhides or bully sticks or stuffed Kongs, you know, one option is you don't get that particular thing anymore. And you only get stuff that you're less likely to get nasty about. But, you know, if they guard their food bowl, for instance, we can't stop feeding the dog. So for a dog that guards its food bowl, we want to get them on set meals. So provide food at regular intervals throughout the day, you know, twice a day, let's say, but then remove the bowl. So we want to get the dogs kind of accustomed to eating their whole meal, and then we pick up the empty bowl. What we don't want is a full bowl sitting on the floor in the middle of the kitchen at all times, because that becomes something potentially that the dog will guard. So we want to provide it at set times and probably in a designated space, and don't approach the dog, you know, and if there are children in the house or multiple family members, you know, feed the dog in a separate room, behind a baby gate, in their crate. Let them have their time, finish up the food, and then let them out, bring them out, and pick up the bowl afterwards. So just don't make an issue of it. Don't test this. Don't mess with the dog while they're eating. The soapbox I will be on every day for the rest of my life, I fear, is this very bad advice that's given to puppy owners about to teach your dog not to resource guard. You need to mess with their food and take it away and stick your hand in and take the bowl. I work with so many dogs that were trained to start guarding their food bowl because of very well-intentioned advice to, you know, take the food bowl away while they're eating. You know, if someone came and took your food away while you're eating, by the third time that person approached, you would probably be starting to get pretty defensive and ugly about it. So we can do the same thing about dogs. Instead, what we want to do is quite the opposite. So we often use the term food bowl bonuses. Can be food bowl or whatever, rawhide, their favorite bed, whatever. Rather than trying to take things away, we want to teach them that if we approach, good stuff's going to start. So while they're at their food bowl, we walk to a distance that's safe enough away that the dog's not going to start growling or becoming defensive, and then we toss a higher value treat to them and walk away, so that we start to build this association that, oh, when people approach me and my food, good things happen. Or when people come towards me while I'm curled up on my favorite corner of the couch, good things happen. So there's no need to growl and show teeth and get nasty and tell them to go away. It's also helpful to teach a few cues so that you can kind of help manage situations. Teaching the dog to drop something cooperatively, to jump off of a couch cooperatively, to come, so that you call them away from a potential guarding situation. Someone's just dropped a bowl full of food on the kitchen floor and you don't want any ugliness to ensue, you can call your dog away from that while people clean it up. It will prevent being in a scenario that could become a problem. I will also say that resource guarding and location guarding, not always, but the vast majority of the resource guarders I see, and I see a lot because this is one of my favorite topics, they usually have body handling issues as well. So that's something to be aware of. Again, going back to let them make that choice to be in contact, use that 3-second rule. Don't be doing unnecessary grooming and toenail trims, etc. If you're seeing resource guarding behavior, there is very, very high likelihood they're also going to have some funniness about touch, body handling, grooming, veterinary care, etc. And just in general, not necessarily severe problem behaviors, but trying to help our fosters be the best version of themselves that they can. Think about just teaching general manners by setting up the environment to prevent problems from starting. So put your expensive shoes in the closet, don't leave food on the counter so we don't develop counter surfing habits or boot chewing habits, etc. Catch the dog being right. So I like to keep just a jar of cookies, and when my dogs do things I enjoy, reward them. What happens all too often is that we don't notice all the time dogs are doing perfectly desirable things like snoozing on their bed or just sitting nicely on the couch, hanging with us, looking out the window, not barking at things going by. We don't notice that because it doesn't get our attention. What we notice is when they bark at the mailman, when they start chewing on the couch cushions, when they start chasing the cat, and then they get attention and then they get interaction. So instead, we want to catch them doing the things that we like first. And so those become stronger habits. We talked about teaching them what to do instead, things like having them lie on a mat at dinner time rather than begging at a table. And also, one of the best things we can do for our kind of behavioral health and kind of living peacefully with other species is making sure we're meeting all of their needs. So by that, we think about not only their physical needs, their health needs, their social needs, but think about their mental enrichment needs, giving them opportunities to do dog type things, use their brains, etc. An easy way to do mental enrichment is, well, training is one. The other thing that is easy to do every day is, instead of giving them food out of a bowl, giving them some kind of puzzle toy, interactive feeder, making it a game where they're searching for, figuring out a problem to get their food. And, we can give you ideas, we can give you enrichment toys that you can put kibble in so your dogs have something that rather than, just inhaling their food, they can knock a Kong wobbler around to get it. Happy to provide the fosters with that, especially if you've got like a very high energy adolescent dog that needs to burn some of the mental energy. Talk to us and we can give you more ideas and give you some tools to help with that mental enrichment. So I want to talk a little bit about what's available to you from the HSHB staff when you're fostering, any dog, but particularly a dog with some behavior needs. We are available to discuss a specific dog needs prior to you taking them home. And for some cases, this might be a requirement. If we have a dog that we're really evaluating, don't know much about, or we've seen some concerning stuff, we might want to have a phone call or a Zoom consult with you before you meet the dog. We'll tell Ann that when she puts the foster request that like you need to talk to Teresa or I, so you have an idea of what's going on with this dog. And we like to do that sometimes before you meet the dog and see how cute they are and get attached. We want you to really, make a very informed decision about what might be entailed in fostering some of our more challenging dogs. When you foster, you will be invited to download the Maddie's Pet Assistant app, which will kind of send you a little survey and ask how things are going around some, both medical and behavior issues, and allow you to kind of give some feedback. Anne reviews those, forwards things on to the behavior team if there are behaviors that are flagged. You'll get some immediate feedback through the app with some advice of things you can try or do, and that tends to be pretty decent advice from what I've seen of it. So we have some kind of immediate feedback, and then if there are some significant concerns, the behavior team will be in touch with you. We'll probably reach out to see how else we can help. We're happy to talk, via email or phone for quick questions. I also will do Zoom consults for longer discussions. We have in the past, and probably, again in the future, we'll plan to offer in-person consults if you want some more hands-on help about working with reactivity, fear, etc. Right now, in this last year, I've been doing any consults via Zoom just because of COVID, but at some point, hopefully before long, we can do home visits again if people would like that or find that helpful. So definitely reach out to us for help. Please don't, the internet is filled with good advice and really bad advice. So, please reach out to us as the first line. Don't be soliciting advice from a lot of strangers on Facebook, and don't go hiring third-party trainers. It's not a regulated industry. There's a lot of, anyone can just put a sign out and say that they're a trainer or a behaviorist or behavior, expert. We really want to make sure that you're getting good quality advice. So kind of come to us first. And if you are unable or unwilling to follow a behavior plan for that animal that we've suggested, then let us know, and we'll talk about whether we can find a better fit for that animal and for you, if for any reason. And there's no shame in that. Fostering a dog with separation anxiety could be pretty challenging or impossible if you work 8 hours of the day out of the home 5 days a week. That's fine, but just let us know that so we can make sure we get animals and fosters matched appropriately. And Anne mentioned this early on. Many of our fosters, especially if they are in some kind of behavior stage, are likely to be prescribed some kind of anti-anxiety medication by the shelter vet team. Those meds will be sent home with you when you pick the foster up. Please continue these meds in your home. Often we might get questions, emails saying that, well, they're out of the shelter now and they don't seem anxious, so can I stop them? Please don't email us on day 3 saying, can I stop the meds? If they're on the meds, it's because we found that they help. There was probably a decrease in anxiety symptoms in the shelter, which is why they were maintained. And we want to continue to keep those anxiety symptoms down so they can continue to be successful in foster. All of those training interventions that I talked about, if we have a dog that has a high level of anxiety, the meds can help them make progress faster because they're keeping that baseline level of anxiety down more. And they shouldn't look anxious. If the meds are working, it is likely, they're going to look okay or, better. So that's what we want. It's having the desired effect. So please understand that they are an important part of the behavior modification plan, and also realize that a lot of the medications that are used for anxiety, if we do at some point choose to take them off, many of them need to be tapered off gradually. Just simply discontinuing some of these medications can have significant negative health effects. So we don't want to be just stopping fluoxetine, for example. If you do have concerns, contact us. Definitely, we're happy to talk to you about it, but we're not going to discontinue the meds just because they're not in the shelter anymore. So be patient with us. We're going to want to work through a behavior plan. If at some point we feel like it's worth trying weaning them off, or if you're seeing side effects that we don't like, we want to talk with the vet team as well. Anything, Anne, Kristen, Teresa, anyone wants to add? I'm kind of nearing the end.
I would just say that for the medical piece of it, is sometimes we get them on maybe an antibiotic or another medication that is meant to be long-term, you want to make sure you finish those out as well.
So we do have available to you if you're interested, if you have a foster with any of these issues. We do have some books that we can loan out for the various issues. So Fired Up, Frantic, and Freaked Out is my favorite book for owners on reactivity. The book Mine by Jean Donaldson is a popular one on resource guarding and body handling. And Patricia McConnell's books, Cautious Canine and I'll Be Home Soon, are good resources for fear and separation anxiety, respectively. All these books are pretty thin booklets. They're not, you know, huge things to read, but they're nice resources, and we have some extra ones on hand in both the behavior and foster offices. So if that's something you would like, because you're dealing with these issues with your foster, we can loan those out to you. I am planning on doing some upcoming Zoom webinars on these specific topics. You know, these are sort of the 4 ones that I see as being really common and relevant, but absolutely, like, tell me, you know, now you can pop in chat, we can you turn your mics off when you talk for a bit as we wrap up, but let me know what else might be helpful to you guys. If this is a nice, helpful forum for you guys to learn and get information, I'm happy to do these. I've got webinars kind of ready to go on any of these topics. And again, we'll do it live and record so that you can, hopefully, I'm envisioning having a little resource library for fosters online that you can watch a recording and get some tips on some of these more challenging behaviors, and have videos and things like that. And we have also been throwing around the idea of having some optional hands-on dog handling coaching at the shelter with the behavior and foster staff. So before you pick up a dog who's reactive on leash, if you want to come and meet with one of us and get some tips for kind of how to handle, how to read the body language, things to do to work with them with some more particular coaching. We're talking about having that as a possibility perhaps down the road as well, if that would be helpful for people. And just leave this up here with our emails. If you guys want to copy it down, but this is the foster team and the behavior team, and I assume we probably have some fosters who do dogs and cats. So I've got Jess on here as well, who does our cat behavior at the shelter. And that is what I have. So thanks for joining me tonight. I hope that this was helpful, and I'd love to hear any questions, feedback, etc., that anyone might have, because I've talked for a long time and it's covered a lot of issues. Oh, I did it wrong. Oh, sorry, Teresa. I don't know if I can edit it right now.
It's okay, no worries.
We'll correct that in the if we can put the PDF of the slides up, I'll get it corrected. Sorry. All right. Moni was just seconding that Fired Up, Frantic, and Freaked Out is a really good resource for reactivity. And as I like it, it's not that long, and it's really informative, and also she's a very good writer. She's a professional writer as well as a professional dog trainer, so it's actually kind of an enjoyable, fun read. All right. Quiet group. Does anybody have any thoughts? I mean, would people like topical presentations like this on some of these issues like reactivity, resource guarding, etc.? Is there an issue that's not listed here that people would like, or something that is a particularly desired topic that you would like us to do first?
So I have a question on your slides earlier.
Yeah.
So what are some things we do that are like around the dog, not necessarily to the dog, or even to the dog, that unintentionally impacts his behavior or her behavior in a negative way?
Um, I mean, boy, that could be a big topic. And I guess anything, it sort of depends on that individual. I think the first thing I would say, if I took it really broadly, like what mistakes do us humans make, really just because by virtue of being humans, that ends up having some fallout in dogs. I think the two things that kind of pop into mind are not reading body language and not recognizing when dogs are trying to vote with their feet to shift away, get distance, turn away, showing some signs of stress, not picking up those early warning signs early enough. There's a phrase I like that says, we need to learn how to kind of listen to their whispers so they don't have to shout. So being able to teach ourselves to observe body language and notice when a dog is feeling uncomfortable so we don't continue to put them into a situation that gets increasingly stressful. I think that's one of the things that we do because, again, we're humans, and reading dog body language is kind of learning a second language for us. And even if we've been practiced and skilled and been around dogs, it can still be very subtle. So the more we can continue to educate ourselves and observe and just slow down to give ourselves the space to watch what the dog's telling us. Because sometimes we kind of rush with what we're doing and don't give the dogs time to give us that feedback. So I'd say maybe being not the best observers of body language sometimes, and maybe partially as a consequence of that is taking choice and control away from dogs, which I know is very almost counterintuitive to how you used to say, like, oh, we have to be this whole leader of the pack mentality, we should be in control and this and that. All animals need choice and need to know that they are going to have the ability to affect the outcomes that happen to them. And so giving the fearful dog the right to retreat and to stay in their safe space and decide if they are ready to go around the block today or not. Maybe they can't go past the driveway. Knowing when a dog wants pets and cuddles and when they just want to go sit on the other side by themselves, which I think a lot of times just also goes back to being able to read that body language. So, I mean, there's all kinds of things that, with any individual dog that we might do that one dog might like that another won't. But I think when we sort of unintentionally end up making mistakes or errors, those would be the big categories. We fail to read their signs early enough, and we would fail to respond by giving them the right to kind of opt out. And so we push them to points where they become more of the dog on the reactive side, slide rather than the avoidance escape slide. Does that help? Is that kind of what you're asking about?
Yeah, that was perfect. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. All right.
Well, to answer your question, Angela, I think it'd be great to have topic specific trainings. I think that would be really, really useful.
Good. I like doing them. Like I said, I can very easily do presentations on all these things because we have done them historically for the dog walkers. But fosters have been kind of a harder group to get together, but the wonders of Zoom kind of makes some of this education easier. Oh, good. I'm glad to hear Rocky's doing good, Diane.
We had some grumbling, but he's been very good, and usually
Good.
grumbling and moved where he needs to go, but in
Good.
his time.
Good. I'm glad. Sounds like you're on the right track. All right. Well, thanks for coming out on a Sunday evening, I guess, coming out, logging in. But it's been fun talking, seeing some of the familiar faces, getting to kind of connect with people that I don't know. I saw a lot of new names that I don't know yet. So I'm glad to see that, and definitely reach out if you have questions, whether with your fosters or if you're just thinking about fostering a behavior case, you want more information, or there's something you want to hear more about, you know how to reach us. I'm always happy to hear from you guys and talk to you. So look forward to hopefully seeing you before long, and maybe some future ones, or at the shelter as you come pick up your dogs. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks. Night.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks.